My husband was away. They treated me like nothing that night. I didn't look important when I walked into the hotel that night. No tailored suit, no confident stride, no one rushing to greet me by name. Just a tired woman dragging a modest suitcase across marble floors that reflected chandeliers worth more than my car. My husband was thousands of miles away, buried in meetings and obligations, and I was here alone in a city that didn't know me and clearly didn't care to. The front desk clerk barely glanced up. "ID, credit card," he said, his tone clipped, practiced, uninterested. I handed them over politely, offering a small smile that wasn't returned. Behind me, someone sighed loudly. I didn't need to turn around to know what kind of person it was, the kind who believed waiting was beneath him. "Some of us have places to be," a man muttered. Heat crept up my neck, but I stayed silent. Years of experience had taught me that defending yourself in moments like these only painted a larger target on your back. Silence was survival. The clerk slid my key card across the counter without meeting my eyes. "7th floor, elevators to your left. No welcome, no enjoy your stay." I picked up my bag and walked away, my steps measured, my back straight. Dignity was something I'd learned to carry myself when no one else would offer it. The elevator doors were closing when I reached them. A hand shot out from inside, forcing them back open. 3 men in expensive suits stood there, laughing loudly, their confidence filling the small space before I even stepped in. I hesitated for half a second. "Are you getting in or not?" one of them said, irritation clear in his voice. I entered, pressing myself against the wall as the doors shut. The smell of expensive cologne mixed with something sharper, entitlement. They didn't lower their voices. "Can you believe the service here?" one said. "Yeah, standards have really dropped," another replied. One of them glanced down at my shoes, then at my suitcase. "You sure you're on the right floor?" he said, not even bothering to hide the smirk. The others laughed. I stared at the glowing numbers above the door, my jaw tight, my hands clenched around the strap of my bag. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself their words meant nothing. But words always leave marks, even when you pretend they don't. The elevator slowed at the 7th floor. The doors slid open and everything changed. She stepped in. She wasn't loud, she wasn't flashy, she didn't announce herself. But the room felt different the moment she entered. She wore a simple dark coat, her posture relaxed, her presence calm in a way that couldn't be faked. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and her eyes, steady, observant, swept the elevator once before settling briefly on me. Not judging. Seeing. The men straightened almost unconsciously. One of them adjusted his tie, another cleared his throat. No one laughed now. She pressed the button for the penthouse floor, then stood beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence without her invading my space. She smelled faintly of something clean and familiar, like rain on stone. The elevator resumed its climb. No one spoke. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her glance at the men, then back at me. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something there, recognition, maybe, or understanding. When the elevator reached the penthouse, she stepped out. Before the doors closed, she turned back, her gaze meeting mine again. "Good evening," she said softly. 2 simple words. But the way she said them, calm, respectful, intentional, felt like a lifeline. The doors slid shut. The men exhaled like they'd been holding their breath. "Who was that?" one whispered. Another shook his head. "No idea, probably someone important." I almost laughed. Almost. When the elevator finally stopped on my floor, I stepped out without a word, my heart pounding for reasons I couldn't explain. I walked down the quiet hallway, the carpet muffling my footsteps, my mind replaying those few seconds over and over again. Probably someone important. The irony of it settled deep in my chest. They had no idea who she was. And neither did I. Not yet. Inside my room, I set my suitcase down and leaned against the door, letting out a shaky breath. The silence was heavy, but it was familiar. I'd learned to live with it over the years, marriage to a good man who was often gone, a life that looked stable from the outside but felt unfinished on the inside. I checked my phone. A message from my husband lit up the screen. Hope you arrived safely, miss you. I typed back quickly. Just checked in, miss you too. I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling, wondering why my heart was still racing. I told myself it was just exhaustion, just another long day. But somewhere deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Because later that night, when I went down to the hotel bar to grab a quiet drink before bed, I saw her again. She sat alone at the far end, nursing a glass of water, her coat draped neatly over the back of her chair. No phone, no distractions, just calm. The bartender leaned toward her, his smile a little too familiar. "Can I get you something stronger?" he asked. She smiled politely. "I'm fine, thank you." He lingered anyway. I took a seat a few stools away, ordering a drink I barely tasted. From where I sat, I watched the way people treated her, initially dismissive, then cautious, then strangely deferential once they realized she wasn't impressed by any of them. A man in a tailored jacket tried to strike up a conversation, his tone slick and confident. She listened, then she said something quietly. He laughed nervously, muttered an apology, and walked away. My curiosity burned. Who was she? And why did everyone seem to underestimate her, right up until the moment they realized they made a mistake? Eventually, she stood to leave. As she passed me, she paused. "You were in the elevator earlier," she said. I nodded, yes. "They were rude to you," she added, not unkindly, just factual. I shrugged, I'm used to it. She studied me for a moment, something thoughtful passing through her eyes. "You shouldn't be," she said. Then she walked away. I sat there long after she was gone, her words echoing in my mind. You shouldn't be. That night, lying alone in a bed that felt far too big, I realized something had shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but enough to matter. I didn't know her name, I didn't know her story. But I knew this. The world had underestimated both of us. And soon, someone was going to pay for it. They looked down on me until she spoke my name. The next morning began the way most lonely mornings do. Quiet, slow, and heavy with thoughts I didn't want to entertain. Sunlight crept through the thin gap in the curtains, casting pale lines across the hotel room. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then it all rushed back. The elevator, the men in suits, the woman with calm eyes who had spoken to me like I mattered. You shouldn't be used to it. Her words followed me as I dressed, as I tied my shoes, as I checked my phone again for messages from my husband. There was one, sent hours earlier, full of affection and routine comfort. I replied with equal warmth, but something in me felt slightly out of sync, like a note played just off-key. Downstairs, the hotel restaurant buzzed with morning energy. Business travelers filled the space, laptops open, voices confident, laughter loud. I stood at the edge for a moment, scanning for an empty table. "Ma'am, that section is reserved," a hostess said sharply when I took 2 steps forward. I looked where she pointed. Empty tables, clean plates, no signs of reservation. "Oh, sorry," I said automatically, stepping back. She didn't apologize, she didn't explain. She simply turned away. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. That was when I heard her voice. "She can sit with me." The hostess froze. I turned. She stood near the window this time, sunlight outlining her profile, a simple cup of coffee in front of her. No laptop, no phone, just presence. The hostess's tone shifted instantly. "Of course, ma'am, right away." I walked toward her, my steps uncertain. "Thank you," I said softly as I sat down. She nodded, "Good morning." There was a pause, not awkward, just unhurried, the kind of silence that didn't demand performance. "My name is Claire," she said finally. I told her mine. "It's nice to meet you properly," she added. "Yesterday didn't leave much room for that." I laughed quietly. No, it didn't. We talked over breakfast. Nothing dramatic at first. Safe topics. Travel, the city, work. I mentioned my husband instinctively, as if anchoring myself to something familiar. She listened without judgment. At one point, a man from another table leaned over. "Excuse me," he said to Claire, barely glancing at me. "Do you mind if I borrow her seat when she's done? We're waiting on colleagues." Her seat. I felt myself shrink. Claire didn't. "She's not going anywhere," Claire said evenly. And neither am I. The man blinked. I didn't mean. I know exactly what you meant, she replied calmly. He flushed, muttered something, and retreated. I stared at her, stunned. You didn't have to do that, I said. Yes, I did, she replied, because people keep getting away with it. There was something firm beneath her kindness, something unmovable. Later that day, the hotel hosted a networking luncheon. I only attended because I felt obligated. It was easier to blend into the background than to explain why I didn't want to go. I stood near the edge of the ballroom, plate untouched, when the same group of men from the elevator spotted me. Well, if it isn't 7th floor, one of them joked. Another added, lose your way again. Before I could respond, a hush fell over the room. Claire stepped forward, standing beside me. Is there a problem? She asked. One of the men laughed nervously. No, ma'am, just joking around. She looked at him steadily. About what? Silence. Then she turned slightly toward me and placed a hand on my arm, not possessive, not dramatic, protective. Gentlemen, she said, her voice carrying easily, this woman is my guest. Their expressions changed instantly. Someone whispered her name. Recognition spread like wildfire. Apologies followed, awkward smiles, sudden respect. I didn't understand it yet, but I felt it. The power shift, the instant karma. As we walked away, my heart pounding, I finally asked, who are you? Claire smiled, not proudly, not smugly. Someone who knows what it's like to be underestimated, she said. And in that moment, I knew this story wasn't just about her standing up for me. It was about what was waking up inside me, too. They tried to humiliate me and exposed themselves instead. By the 3rd day, people no longer ignored me. They noticed me, but not for the reasons I deserved. Word had spread quickly after the luncheon. Not about my work, not about my character, but about my proximity to Claire. I felt it in the way conversations paused when I entered a room, in the sideways glances, in the polite smiles that never quite reached anyone's eyes. To them, I wasn't someone. I was someone attached to someone. And that made me dangerous in a way they didn't yet understand. That afternoon, the hotel hosted a panel discussion in one of its smaller conference halls. I took a seat near the back, notebook on my lap, hoping to disappear into anonymity again. Claire was scheduled to attend, but she hadn't arrived yet. That was my first mistake, thinking the room would treat me differently without her. The moderator, a sharp-voiced man with an impressive resume, scanned the audience. We'll be opening the floor for questions shortly, he announced. Please keep them relevant. When the time came, I raised my hand. He hesitated, his eyes flicked over me dismissive. Yes, he said, clearly reluctant. I stood, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. I asked a thoughtful, well-prepared question, one rooted in experience, not theory. The room went quiet. The moderator smiled thinly. That's an interesting perspective, he said, though perhaps a bit simplistic. Laughter rippled through the audience. My face burned, but I stayed standing. I disagree, I said, and here's why. He cut me off. Let's allow someone with more direct involvement to answer. More laughter, louder this time. I sat down slowly, my hands trembling. I'd been dismissed without being heard again. That was when the doors at the back of the hall opened. Claire walked in. The energy shifted instantly. The moderator straightened, his smile changed. Ah, Claire, we were just... She raised a hand gently. I heard. Her gaze found me first. Would you mind repeating your question? She asked. The room held its breath. I stood again, my heart racing, and repeated every word. This time, no one laughed. Claire turned to the moderator. That wasn't simplistic, she said calmly. It was precise and correct. She addressed the room next, her voice even but powerful. This woman raised an issue many of you have ignored because it's inconvenient. Dismissing it doesn't make it less real. It just reveals who's unwilling to listen. Silence. The moderator swallowed. Of course, I didn't mean. I know, Claire said. You didn't mean to show your bias, but you did. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. Claire nodded toward me. She's been doing this work longer than half the people in this room. The fact that you didn't know that is the problem. My breath caught. They looked at me differently now, not impressed, not apologetic. Exposed. After the panel, the same moderator approached me, his voice suddenly respectful. I owe you an apology, he said. I didn't realize. That's exactly the issue, I replied quietly. You didn't try to. He nodded, chastened, and walked away. Later, as Claire and I stood near the elevators, I finally found the courage to speak. I didn't know I could do that, I admitted. Stand my ground. Claire smiled softly. You always could, you just weren't given the space. The elevator doors opened. Inside stood the same men from the first night, their confidence dulled, their posture uncertain. One of them met my eyes and looked away. Instant karma isn't always loud. They tried to break me, but I finally spoke the truth. Something changed after the panel. It wasn't dramatic. No applause followed me down the hallway. No one suddenly treated me like a celebrity, but the quiet disrespect, the kind that hides behind politeness, began to crack. And cracks, once formed, have a way of spreading. That evening, the hotel hosted a private dinner for select attendees. I hadn't been invited. I knew that before I even asked. My name wasn't on the list because people still didn't know where to place me, too visible to ignore, too inconvenient to include. Claire noticed the hesitation on my face as we stood near the entrance. You weren't planning to go in, she asked. I wasn't invited, I replied. She looked at the clipboard, then back at me. You are now. The attendant hesitated. Ma'am, this is a closed event. Claire's voice remained calm. Then you should update your list. Something in her tone made the man step aside without another word. Inside, the room hummed with restrained elegance, soft music, low laughter, glasses clinking. Conversations paused as we entered. I felt the weight of every glance. A woman near the bar leaned toward another guest. Isn't that the one from the panel? Yes, the other whispered. Claire defended her. Not she spoke well. Not she was right. Just Claire defended her. The dismissal stung more than I expected. Dinner began. Midway through, the host, a well-known figure with a commanding presence, stood to make a toast. He spoke about leadership, innovation, and integrity. Then casually, he added, of course, these values only work when everyone understands their place. Laughter followed. I froze. Claire's hand tightened slightly on her glass. The host continued, eyes drifting toward me. Some people confuse proximity with contribution. The room went silent. It was a calculated move, public, polished, cruel. My chest constricted. Every instinct told me to stay quiet, to let it pass, to survive. But I remembered the panel, the elevator, the years of shrinking. I stood. The scrape of my chair echoed louder than I expected. I'd like to respond, I said, my voice steady despite the fear surging through me. The host smiled thinly. Of course. I didn't confuse proximity with contribution, I continued. You did. Murmurs rippled through the room. I earned my place long before anyone here knew my name. The only difference is that today, I stopped letting people decide my value for me. The host's smile faltered. I've been dismissed, interrupted, and underestimated my entire career, I said. Not because I lacked skill, but because people assumed I did. Silence. I looked around the room. If leadership means knowing your place, then maybe it's time we question who's been assigning them. Claire stood beside me, not to shield me, but to stand with me. The host cleared his throat. That wasn't my intention. I know, I replied, but intention doesn't erase impact. The applause started slowly, then grew. Not thunderous, not performative. Real. Later, alone in the hallway, my hands shook as the adrenaline faded. I'm terrified, I admitted. Claire smiled gently. That's what courage feels like before it becomes confidence. For the first time in a long time, I believed her. They tried to divide us and force the truth into the open. By the fifth day, the tension was no longer subtle. People had stopped pretending nothing was happening. Whispers followed us through hallways. Conversations paused when Claire and I approached. Smiles had become measured, strategic, offered not out of warmth but calculation. And then came the rumors. I first heard them in the lounge, spoken just loudly enough for me to catch. She's using her. Climbing by association. Sad really, married woman too. Each word landed like a small cut, not deep enough to bleed openly, but enough to hurt. That night, I confronted Claire in the quiet of the terrace, overlooking the city lights. "They're talking," I said, "about us, about me." Claire leaned against the railing, unbothered by the height or the stairs below. "They always do when they lose control of a narrative." "It's different this time," I replied. "They're questioning my integrity, my marriage." She turned to face me fully. "And what do you think?" The question caught me off guard. I hesitated. "I think I've spent most of my life explaining myself to people who never intended to understand me." Claire studied my face, then stopped explaining. The next evening, the hotel hosted its final gala, a polished affair meant to celebrate collaboration and success. Everyone who mattered would be there, including my husband. He'd surprised me with a last-minute arrival, texting me just hours before landing. "Couldn't stay away any longer, missed you." My stomach twisted. When he walked into the ballroom, confident and familiar, relief washed over me, followed quickly by fear. He greeted colleagues easily, unaware of the undercurrent running through the room. Claire stood a few steps away, observing quietly. Then someone made their move. A woman I'd barely spoken to approached my husband, her smile sympathetic. "You must be so proud," she said. "Your wife's made quite the impression here." He smiled. "I am." She tilted her head, especially given how close she's become to Claire. The pause was intentional. I saw it, the flicker of confusion in his eyes, the question forming before he could stop it. That was it. The line had been crossed. I stepped forward before Claire could speak. "There's nothing inappropriate happening," I said clearly, "but there is a lot of disrespect." The woman stiffened. "I didn't mean." "You did," I replied, "and I won't let you imply otherwise." My husband looked between us. "Is there something I should know?" I took a breath. "Yes, that I've been underestimated, belittled, and dismissed for years, and I finally stopped accepting it." The room felt very still. Claire stepped closer, not defensively, but in solidarity. "She earned every ounce of respect she's receiving," Claire said, "long before I ever met her." My husband nodded slowly. "I believe that." The woman excused herself quickly, her attempt at division collapsing under its own weight. Later, as the music swelled and people danced, my husband took my hand. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner," he said quietly. "So am I replied. Across the room I caught Claire's eye. She smiled, not sadly, not possessively. Proudly. "They judged me once, now they stand when I speak." The last morning came quietly. No tension in the air, no whispers trailing behind me, just a strange stillness, like the calm that follows a storm when everything has already been decided. I stood by the window of my hotel room, suitcase open, sunlight washing over the city below. My husband slept behind me, breathing slow and even. The past few days replayed in my mind, not as chaos, but as clarity. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into this hotel, carrying herself small. Downstairs, the final session of the conference gathered the remaining attendees. This time, I didn't linger at the edges. I walked in with my head high, not because I wanted to be seen, but because I refused to hide. The organizer stepped up to the microphone. "Before we conclude," he said, "there's someone we'd like to invite to speak." I felt it before I heard my name. A ripple of anticipation moved through the room as eyes turned toward me. My heart pounded, but I stood. I walked to the stage, each step steady, each breath grounding me in the truth I'd fought to claim. "I wasn't always this confident," I began, "and I wasn't always given space to be heard." I spoke about resilience, about the cost of silence, about the damage done when we decide someone's worth before listening to their voice. "I didn't change," I said. "What changed is that I stopped shrinking to fit other people's expectations." Applause filled the room. Not because of who I stood beside. Not because of rumors or proximity. Because of me. Afterward, people approached, some to congratulate, some to apologize, some simply to say thank you. Instant karma doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like growth. In the lobby, as I prepared to leave, I found Claire waiting near the doors. "You did that on your own," she said. "So did you," I replied. She smiled, that was never in doubt. We stood there for a moment, two women who had changed each other without ever trying to own one another. As I walked away, I glanced back one last time. Claire raised her hand in a small wave. I returned it knowing this wasn't an ending, but a beginning I finally chose for myself. They thought the story ended, but real justice came later. I thought leaving the hotel would mean closure. That once the revolving doors spun behind me, the weight of those days would lift, and life would gently return to its familiar rhythm. My husband and I flew home together, talked about work, shared meals, slipped back into routines that felt safe and known. But something inside me refused to go back. Confidence, I learned, doesn't disappear once it's been awakened. It waits, it watches, and it demands to be used. 2 weeks later, my phone rang during lunch. An unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. "I hope I'm not interrupting," a voice said when I answered. "This is the conference board." I listened as they spoke, about feedback, about complaints, about formal reviews. Apparently, what had happened during those final days hadn't faded quietly. Multiple attendees had come forward, stories overlapped, patterns emerged. The moderator from the panel, the host from the private dinner, the men from the elevator. An investigation was underway. "We'd like you to formally document your experience," the voice said, "if you're willing." I sat very still. There was a time I would have declined, told myself it wasn't worth the trouble, that speaking up would only invite more scrutiny, more discomfort. But that woman no longer existed. "I'm willing," I said. The process wasn't easy. Revisiting moments I'd learned to minimize brought back old emotions, anger, shame, doubt. But something else rose alongside them. Certainty. I wasn't exaggerating. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't alone. Weeks passed, emails followed, meetings were scheduled. And then the announcements came. The moderator was removed from future panels, pending mandatory bias training. The dinner host quietly stepped down from his advisory role. 2 executives were dismissed after multiple complaints confirmed long-standing behavior. No dramatic headlines, no public spectacle. Just consequences. The kind that actually matter. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, my husband joined me. "You seem lighter," he said. "I am," I replied. He nodded. "I'm proud of you, not for what happened, but for what you did with it." Later that night, I received a message from Claire. I heard, "Looks like they finally listened." I smiled. "Because they had to," I typed back. She responded almost immediately. "You made them." We didn't talk often after that. We didn't need to. Some connections aren't meant to last forever. They exist to change you, then set you free. Months later, I stood in a room full of people again, but this time I was there by invitation. I spoke about accountability, about quiet harm, about the power of refusing to stay small. When I finished, the room stood. Not out of obligation, out of respect. And I finally understood something that had taken me years to learn. Instant karma isn't about revenge. It's about truth catching up to people who thought they could outrun it.